Hello, I'm Esther Githu-Ewart. It's Wednesday, May 10th. This is Africa 54. Fierce clashes and airstrikes shake Sudan's capital Khartoum Wednesday as delegations of rival military factions continue talks in Saudi Arabia aimed at securing a ceasefire. Survivors of Congo's floods continue to search through the mud for family members as thousands remain missing after the country's deadliest natural disaster in recent history. We'll hear from an analyst in Goma. And despite the challenges that continue with operating business in a conflict-prone region, Goma's Serena hotel in the eastern DRC manages to maintain its 5-star rating since it opened in 2021. Africa 54's Paul Ndiho speaks to the manager, Uget Bishweka. Fighting raged in the Sudanese capital and a city to the south Wednesday with fierce clashes and airstrikes, according to residents. Meanwhile, delegations of rival military factions continued talks in Saudi Arabia aimed at securing a ceasefire and humanitarian relief. Residents reported ground battles in several neighborhoods of Khartoum between the army and the paramilitary rapid support forces, as well as heavy gunfire in the north of Omdurman and the east of Bahri. Since Tuesday, the army has been pounding targets across the three cities as it tries to root out RSF forces that have taken control of large residential areas and strategic sites since early in the conflict that erupted on April 15th. In Washington, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the United States will not give up on the goal of putting Sudan back on track to civilian democratic governance.
We have diplomats from the United States and Saudi Arabia deeply engaged in talks in Jeddah, working in close consultation with counterparts from the UK, the United Arab Emirates, the African Union, and other multilateral partners. The collective aim that we have is to lay the foundation for further negotiations between the parties that we hope can lead to a permanent cessation of hostilities. But in the first instance, we're working in Jeddah to extend the ceasefire and get agreement on the provision of humanitarian assistance to the people of Sudan.
Mediation talks have been going on since Saturday between the army and the rival paramilitary rapid support forces in the Saudi Arabia city of Jeddah. The U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee held a hearing Wednesday on the conflict in Sudan. Victoria Nuland, Under-Secretary of State for Political Affairs, and Sarah Charles, Assistant to the Administrator at the U.S. Agency for International Development's Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance, briefed the senators.
Our first priority, as you noted, was the safety of our people. Over 7 days, we consolidated all U.S. personnel at the embassy compound, where our military then bravely extracted them by helicopter on April 23rd to Ethiopia and onward to Djibouti. Then, with the help of partners, British, French, Germans, and Saudis, we organized 3 overland convoys from Khartoum to Port Sudan, transporting more than 700 more people, and hundreds of our own people also boarded allied and partner flights. In total, we facilitated the departure of 2,000 people, including 1,300 U.S. citizens and family members, along with U.S. LPRs, locally employed staff, and nationals from other allied and partner countries. From the outset, we have also worked to silence the guns. Secretary Blinken, Assistant Secretary Molly Fee, our ambassador to Sudan, Anthony Godfrey, and teams across the department have been tirelessly engaged. First, with Secretary Blinken's intense personal effort, we have secured 6 sequential short-term ceasefires, which have lessened the fighting and allowed these evacuations and some initial movement of humanitarian aid. And then, working intensively with Saudi Arabia and other partners, we began on Sunday these pre-negotiations with the warring parties. To date, the Secretary has made 7 separate calls to Generals Burhan and Hamedi to try to silence the guns, jumpstart this emergency diplomacy, and get talks going. He's also been in touch with African Union Chairperson Faki and leaders across the region and in Europe.
But the impact on the people of Sudan has already been devastating. Ongoing violence has led to the death of hundreds, injuries to thousands, and destruction of critical infrastructure and disruption of basic services. Attacks against humanitarian staff and the looting of humanitarian assets forced many of our partners to temporarily suspend hundreds of life-saving programs and relocate their staff, impacting millions of people who relied on these programs to meet basic needs. Before the conflict, almost 16 million people in Sudan, more than 1/3 of the population, required humanitarian assistance. We do not yet know the full extent to which humanitarian conditions have worsened since April 15, but the early reports are grim. An estimated 70% of hospitals across conflict-affected areas are not operational.
That was Victoria Nuland, Under Secretary of State for Political Affairs, and Sarah Charles, Assistant to the Administrator at the U.S. Agency for International Development's Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance, briefing the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee on the situation in Sudan. In the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo, local authorities on Tuesday confirmed more than 5,000 people remained missing and at least 411 were killed by floods in the country's east. The deadly floods, one of the worst the African nation has recently faced, and ensuing landslides swept away houses and buildings. David Doyle has more.
5 days after floods brought devastation to this village in Democratic Republic of Congo, and survivor Paul Serashago is still searching for members of his family.
They lived in the wooden annex in front here, but given that we haven't found them, we think they might be in my father's home.
More than 5,500 people remain missing in this remote, mountainous area of South Kivu province. The floods tore through the riverside villages of Nyamukubi and Bushushu, flattening homes, destroying crops, and killing more than 400 people. On Tuesday, government officials brought blankets, food, and a few coffins to Nyamukubi. They also donated money to affected families and a local clinic. But the delegation did not visit Bushushu, where the death toll is believed to be higher. This resident, Shamavu Sabajonge, said though the amount of food given was small, it was appreciated because they didn't know what they were going to eat. Congo's deadliest natural disaster in recent memory has highlighted the vulnerability of people to climate change in many parts of Africa. Poor urban planning and weak infrastructure means many communities cannot withstand increasing bouts of extreme weather. The Red Cross believes Congo's floods have left 8,000 people in need of assistance, but aid efforts have been hampered by a lack of access and resources. In Nyamukubi, the homeless are packed into the few buildings left intact. Outside, the swollen river flows past entire neighborhoods that have been flattened by boulders, as the smell of dead bodies rises from the earth.
David Doyle of Reuters filed that report. And we'll be right back after this short break, where we'll bring you the tech report on Goma Serena Hotel, where Paul Ndiho just came back from Eastern Congo. We'll be right back.
On the next Straight Talk Africa, dark smoke billowed above Khartoum on Monday, even as the warring sides in Sudan's conflict held peace talks in Saudi Arabia aimed at firming up a shaky ceasefire. Plus, journalist Rodney Sear tells me why he wrote the unofficial biography of Liberian President George Weah. Join me, Heidi Adams, on the next Straight Talk Africa.
In other news, Tunisian authorities were on Wednesday investigating a shooting spree by a police officer that claimed 5 lives and sparked mass panic during a Jewish pilgrimage at Africa's oldest synagogue. The police officer first killed a colleague and took his ammunition, then went to the Griba synagogue and opened fire. The assailant was then shot dead. An attorney for Donald Trump said there will be an appeal of a federal court jury verdict in New York that found him liable for sexually abusing and defaming a one-time magazine advice columnist 20 years ago. The verdict was split. Jurors rejected Carroll's claim that she was raped, finding Trump responsible for a less serious form of sexual assault along with the defamation. As a result, the jury awarded a $5 million to E. Jean Carroll.
Yeah, I mean, look, strange verdict. This was a rape claim. It was a rape case all along, and the jury rejected that, but made other findings. So we'll obviously be appealing those other findings, but they rejected her rape claim, and she'd always claimed this was a rape case. So it's a little perplexing, but, we move forward.
Carroll left the courthouse without speaking to reporters, only responding to a woman's yell to her, "You're so brave and beautiful," to which Carroll said, "Thank you so much." Trump slammed the decision, insisting he is the subject of a witch hunt. Trump is running for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination after losing his 2020 re-election bid. He is facing several criminal investigations stemming from his efforts to overturn the 2020 outcome and his retention of classified documents from his presidency at his Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida. But the allegations made by Carroll were adjudicated in a civil, not criminal case, and as a result carried no threat of a conviction or jail time for the 76-year-old Trump. Going back to the Democratic Republic of Congo, earlier I spoke to Jean-Claude Nzai in Goma, DRC. He is a program specialist with Chorus International, a humanitarian aid organization, and asked him to describe the impact of the rains in the region.
The situation remains difficult for thousands of families who have been affected with this landslide from the flooding. And as I can tell, as of today, we are reporting around 415 people dead and confirmed buried. And we can tell from the discussions that we are having with people on the ground that the trauma is growing. As we account for people who have lost all the members of their families, husbands who have lost their wives and children, businesses who have been wiped away, livelihood and livestock, means that have been wiped away. So the situation is tense, and people are in dire need of support. As of this afternoon, we're trying to understand whether we can get into the affected areas.
How is Chorus International and other aid organizations helping those in dire need right now?
As of, I think, yesterday and today, we had issues because the only access that we had was remaining the lake. So we have floating bodies on the same lake. We have floating bodies into the rivers, the affected rivers. And the government is is thinking about some orders to be made and prevent, people from getting through the affected areas through the lake. As the government, local leaders, local communities keep on searching into the rubbles, into the mud, into the lake now that we have people floating from the lake. So it is still more tricky for humanitarian agencies to step in and position themselves as to which or to what extent they can bring in the support. So what we are doing currently as Chorus International, we are still monitoring with other stakeholders and local actors on the ground, local leaders on the ground. We are getting more and more information about the number of people in need, the number of what is needed. And we are also trying to collect information from other agencies as of how they are planning to step in and respond to the needs of thousands of people who are affected by this crisis.
What's next for survivors? Where can they turn to for food, for shelter, for water?
I myself talked with a man called Pascal, who is on the ground there. And I was asking him this question about a few days after, no food, no water, the hydraulic installation have been wiped away. The affected zones were endemic to the cholera outbreak because that zone hosted thousands of people from North Kivu following the M23 clashes between M23 and the FARDC. So that question came out, was like, how are people coping? And one of the saddest answer I ever received was that people are not interested with eating or drinking because they haven't found their beloved ones. So one thing is happening on the ground is the solidarity between the affected villages and the non-affected villages. People can still bring in what they can. Two, affected populations are using houses that have been affected but not completely destroyed. But when it rains, everybody is like going outside. As of this afternoon, it was raining, and everybody was outside because they don't know what can happen next. And third, as the government representatives try to get in and support where they can, when you bring in NFIs, non-food items, you just realize that was not the need. The need is water. But then when you think about water, like, okay, we need chlorination, we need medical supplies, we need a lot of stuff at the same time. So this situation is still hard to manage.
That was Jean-Claude Nzai, a program specialist with Chorus International, talking to me earlier from Goma, DRC. President Joe Biden and congressional leaders reached no deal during a Tuesday meeting to resolve the impasse on raising the limit the government can borrow to meet its financial obligations. If no agreement is reached in the next few weeks, the U.S. will go into default for the first time in history, sending financial shockwaves around the world. White House Bureau Chief Patsy Widakuswara reports.
President Joe Biden sought to calm global market jitters over the looming crisis weeks before the nation is at risk of defaulting on its obligations for the first time in history.
I made clear during our meeting that default is not an option. Repeated that time and again. America is not a deadbeat nation.
Biden met Tuesday afternoon with congressional leaders in a bid to resolve the months-long impasse to ensure the government can borrow more money to pay its bills. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, a Republican, refuses to raise the debt limit unless it's paired with spending cuts.
The House has raised the debt ceiling in a responsible manner, curb our spending at the same time, bring us economic growth. And I asked the President this simple question. Does he not believe there's any place we could find savings?
Failure to raise the U.S. debt ceiling could not only spark a U.S. recession, but also send shockwaves to global financial markets, warns White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre.
Default would create global uncertainty about the value of the U.S. dollar and U.S. institutions and leadership, leading to volatility in currency and financial markets and commodity markets that are priced in dollars.
The U.S. economy is the largest in the world, and the U.S. dollar is the world's dominant reserve currency. Should the U.S. fail to pay its debts, it would also trigger a sell-off in U.S. Treasury bonds, weakening the dollar and raising interest rates, analysts say.
If interest rates in the United States go up, it's going to take all other interest rates up with it. It's going to make all other risk assets look very shaky.
U.S. Treasury bonds are traditionally considered the safest investment. Despite the turmoil, a former top economist at the State Department says countries and investors need not be overly concerned about a U.S. default.
This is a question of willingness to pay, not ability to pay, and that is a very big distinction when you're looking at default.
The leaders are set for another meeting on Friday. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News, Washington.
As prices for food and goods remain high in many countries, some economists say the persistent inflation is partly due to corporate profit seeking. VOA's Veronica Balderas Iglesias has the details.
At the International Monetary Fund in Washington, researcher Daniel Lee says there is cautious optimism about global inflation levels easing this year.
But this is going to be a long fight. We don't think most countries will get to their inflation target until 2025.
Different factors have contributed to advanced and developing economies exceeding their inflation targets.
One was the boost to energy prices and food prices, partly from the war in Ukraine. Right? On top of that, a lot of countries are dealing with labor market shortages, not enough workers, that's driving up wages.
In capitalist economies, when demand goes up, prices also rise. But some analysts see an unusual form of inflation, even as in their assessment, demand holds fairly stable.
Generally, companies that are quite close to consumers, so at the end of the supply chain, if you like, these companies have been able to persuade their customers to accept not just the cost increases, but the cost increases and then a little bit more. And that little bit more is, of course, an increase in profit margin.
It might not be a sustainable approach, Donovan noted.
If consumers start saying, actually, that's not a fair price increase, I'm not going to pay that, then what you see is companies starting to worry that if they raise their profit margins too far, their brand value is going to be damaged.
The National Retail Federation represents a full spectrum of companies. Their lead researcher affirms that consumer demand has increased dramatically and describes the profit-led inflation arguments as, quote, very simplistic.
Every single day, many of our members think about lowering prices. The problem, though, in some cases is that, when the prices of goods are rising all over the place and inventories are low, then, retailers have to be able to pass some of those costs along to consumers.
What some may see as price gouging, others may view as businesses charging what the market will bear. Some may decry excess profits, while others note that maximizing profit is the norm in a free market system. Economists say profit can also rise through good management practices.
If you have better clients or if you have a better human capital inside your company, definitely you're going to have the potential of actually having larger profit margins.
Cooling consumer demand can force companies to abandon price hikes and rein in inflation, a key goal of the U.S. Central Bank, which recently boosted interest rates for the 10th time in just over a year. Verónica Valderas Iglesias, VOA News, Washington.
It's time for our tech segment, and joining us now is our tech reporter, Paul Ndiho. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Esther. Despite the challenge of operating business in a conflict-prone region, Serena Goma in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo has managed to maintain its 5-star rating since it opened in 2021. It's owned and operated by a Congolese national, managed by Serena Hotels. I sat down with Huguette Abishuka, whose family owns the property. She's also doubles as Serena Goma's sales and marketing manager.
Goma Serena is the first and only 5-star hotel in the Eastern DRC. We opened in 2020 during COVID, which was a challenge, but we managed. We have 109 rooms, all facing the lake. Everyone can enjoy the beautiful views that we have here. Goma Serena is part of the Serena Hotels chain, which are present in Eastern Africa, in Uganda, Tanzania, DRC, and Rwanda as well, Kenya, obviously. So we are the newest baby of the brand.
What is it like running a business in an environment that a lot of people think is unsafe?
That's the reason why we are doing the business, because it's possible to do it. If we just sit back and have to take on the bad publicity, the negativity that are being said around the region, we won't do anything, and we want to actually bring something to the community. We want the tourism sector to grow again, but I'm not going to say that it's not challenging. It's challenging because right now we are getting more of business travelers than the leisure travelers. But still, we are pushing.
Are you making a little bit of money, or it's very tough?
We are making money, but it's not as good as it should be. We're not at our maximum capacity in terms of room occupancy, but we do get conferences, events, weddings, and all that. So life is happening in Goma, and yeah, we are making money.
What are some of the unique things about this property?
First of all, I would say the location. We are by the lake, and it's one of the greatest location you can find. It's 10 to 15 minutes drive from the airport, the international airport, Goma. It's 5 minutes from the border, from the border DRC and Rwanda border. And I would say its location is one of the best, the key selling point that we actually advertise as well.
When I was doing my research, I just did a simple Google search and I came across your name. So you are owner of this beautiful property. What does it take to own something like this? You're an African, born and raised here, right?
Yeah, I was raised here.
Your parents born and raised here, they've never left. A lot of people think that it's not possible for Africans to own something like this.
It's actually possible, like you can see. My dad worked very hard his entire life. I saw it. I grew up seeing him working hard. He wouldn't be at home so often. If you're consistent in what you do, you can do it. I know a lot of Africans who own businesses and they manage, they do it. It's possible.
You're also part of the management structure. Your family name is on it. Does that mean that you have to go the extra mile to make sure that everything is perfect?
Yes, I take everything, let's say, at heart, because this means a lot to my dad, to my family. I know how hard he worked to be able to build this property, and I always work with, like you say, an extra. I would say an extra pressure, but in the positive way, not negative. I really enjoy my job, and the fact that it's something that means a lot to my family, to my dad, it makes me push even harder and try to show everyone, and especially my dad, that we are here to help you.
I see a lot of young people here. You talked about giving back to the community. Is that part of the long-term plan? Are all these people employed here from within the community?
Almost 95% of our staff is Congolese. It's only in the management that there are foreigners for the sake of training. They are training Congolese. They are here for a certain period of time, a limited period of time, and after that, it should be Congolese managing the hotel.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, viewers. See you tomorrow.